I thought we would begin with the low hanging fruit, right? Like start with the obvious things, right? And I've had this conversation with some other high level coaches, just like off just in our little private conversations. And it's come up many times. And it's this, we're sitting there and we're like, I just don't know if a lot of people understand the level of intensity at which you really have to push yourself and execute well in the actual lifting part to create a stimulus for muscle protein synthesis to happen, right? We'll get into that. For, the mechanical tension to be hard enough, or the muscle breakdown, or, there's different theories of what creates muscle to be enough, to be sufficient enough to make that happen. So, for example, you know, when you're first starting out, you're not going to be able to go as hard, right? You're going to still be kind of learning, like, how do I work lats? Like, what is this? A bent over row? Like, where does my elbow go?
Mhm.
So it's important to go through that phase where you're really kind of connecting to your body. It's not going to be, you're not going to look like the rock in the gym. You're going to be figuring it out, right? But once you kind of figure it out, I know it sounds obvious, but you've got to push yourself enough within safety. It has to suck enough that
Mhm.
you are like, for me at this point, I'm shaking. I just got done lifting. I was doing and I'm just shaking. Some swear words are slipping out. My eyes are closed. My face is like, like that's the level at which I'm pushing myself now that I have form down. So let's get into this. This is what I wanted to share with your people. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is kind of exciting because in 2022, they did an umbrella review, which, if you guys are into studies here and there, nerdy, you probably are if you watch Sarah's show. There's like the systematic reviews and the meta analyses. Well, an umbrella review is a review of the meta analyses, and this is systematic reviews. So this was all on what actually leads to more hypertrophy. So if you're not aware, hypertrophy is what we're talking about when we're talking about increasing muscle size, which is everybody in the gym is looking for some level of hypertrophy, unless you're just really, you just want to be an Olympic lifter and don't care or something, but come on. If you're lifting weights, if you're resistance training, you're wanting some muscle. Okay. And so this was really cool because it went over so many that I think they ultimately chose 14 different ones, but thousands and thousands of people through many years, what actually leads to hypertrophy, what actually makes the difference. So the first thing is I want to talk about, just give you guys a, kind of the summary of this. Sets, how many sets and total volume? I get questions about this all the
Mhm.
time. Like how many, and we'll talk about frequency, which is like how many times you actually work out a week, how many sets per muscle group, how much should I work out? Okay, so here's the deal. Ready? So 2 to 3 sets per exercise was found to give the most hypertrophy. 4 to 6 sets. Did I say sets or reps?
Sets.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
So 2 to 3 sets, they
Yeah.
found that 4 to 6 reps did not provide any additional benefit on hypertrophy. And they think that may have to do with just creating the stimulus for muscle protein synthesis to happen. So 2 to 3 sets per exercise, I'd say 3. And 10 total sets per muscle group per week. Okay, so that is what they found led to the most hypertrophy. Now, that's really going after it, okay? I don't do 10 sets for every muscle group at this point, but when I first started out, I was going really hard. Like I had 2 bicep days a week, or the areas that I really wanted to grow, I was doing a lot, that way. There's other considerations, like if you have hypothyroidism or adrenal issues or
Right.
you're inflamed, and we'll get into that later, but this is just generally what leads to hypertrophy, okay? Okay, next, intensity. This just means like basically how heavy the load is or how hard it is. So I'm not going to get into like, there's 70% of your 1 rep max is high. And,
Right.
I'm not going to get into that. All you really need to know is that in terms of intensity, all that really matters is that you get close to failure or failure. So
Okay.
what does that mean? That means you're trying to do another bicep curl and you literally can't. Okay. And I just always tell people to just go to failure, because most people don't know what true muscle failure is. I have been in some really advanced training camps where like I mean I pushed myself hard. I thought I was like, really really good at that. And no, dude, I found out like I could go much past what I thought was
Mhm.
failure when I've got these advanced coaches screaming like, "Come on, Sarah, don't stop, go, go." And I'm like, "Ah!" You know what I mean? So if you're not
Yeah.
screaming and crying and like, "Ah!"
Mhm.
then you probably haven't actually reached failure. Yeah.
And you bring up a good point. Like when you're working out by yourself, you're not going to push yourself versus a coach yelling at you. I just went to a strength yoga class this morning and I'm shaking
Mhm.
because the guys to my left and right are not quitting. And I'm not going to quit when they're
Right.
not quitting,
Right.
right?
Right.
Versus if I'm in my garage working out, I'm kind of tired. I'm done.
Right,
Um,
or you might have a coach there if you're one-on-one trainer and you're doing bicep curls and you're, like, stuck, and then they just use their 2 fingers to help you
right.
get it more, and they're like, "Come on, keep going," and you're like, "Ah,"
Yeah.
you know? So, if you're training by yourself, just, pretty much get pretty close to failure on
Right.
your sets, and you'd be more likely to which just means, like, I can't do any more reps, and you'll be more likely to get that hypertrophy stimulus.
And a lot of women don't understand what that means because I'll say lift heavy weights. They go, I don't know what that
I
means.
know,
Like,
I
what?
know.
Well, what does that mean? That means that you lift it. And if you are not at failure by rep 12, then it's probably not heavy enough. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so like they looked at this. So, low intensity, we're talking about intensity right now. Low would be like 20 or more reps, moderate would be 11 to 20 reps,
Right.
of what you could do, and high would be less than 11 reps, right? And without getting into it, it's like, going really low rep, we're looking in more of like the strength, like power lifters, that kind of stuff. Mediums hypertrophy generally is what we say. And then like, if you're going over 15 reps or more, that's generally muscular endurance. Okay. What they're showing in this umbrella uh, review is that it really didn't matter that much as long as you got to failure in terms or close to failure in terms of hypertrophy. And yes, I get this question all the time. I don't even know how to answer it. I have one on my most recent post on Facebook. It's like, how heavy do you lift? And I'm like, I don't know how to answer that question. I literally didn't answer it because I'm like, I don't know how to answer that. Like, and I try to teach about this often. It's not like, let's say I'm today, for example, I'm going to post about this in a minute. I filmed a little bit of it. I have this high rep. It's 3 exercises back to back for biceps. I'm seated on an incline bench. I'm doing a 45-degree, meaning my forearm is going about 45 degrees, at an angle out from my body. And I'm seated on an incline. So my biceps are like stretched out kind of
Mm.
behind my body. So I'm doing 10 reps like that. Then I'm turning it into a hammer curl, which is when you have a neutral grip, right? So thumbs are going facing forward. I'm doing 10 like that and I'm really nailing form. Like I'm isolating, squeezing, making it hard. And then I go underhand or supinated like a regular bicep curl in that stretch position. Typically will kick that off with like a 15-pound dumbbell, but like I can barely finish it. And by the end, by the last one, I was doing 10-pounders and I'm
Mhm.
like, like shaking, and I'm going to get the stimulus from that. So when somebody says, how heavy do you lift? And I'm like, oh, I did 10 pounds on dumbbells today. Well, that's a really different thing. The level to which I pushed myself because I was doing so many reps in this triset and
Right.
because my form was really good. I'm not moving my elbows and shoulders around. I'm strict. I'm just like, it's all biceps is what's making my forearm move. That 10 pounds is going to be so much heavier than if I just like had not super good form and I'm just standing there and I'm just doing 10-pound dumbbells, right? So it's not necessarily how heavy the weight is. There's other variables here which we're going through, that will cause that to stress the muscles more. So
Mhm.
for that one, my technique was harder. I'm in the stretched position and I'm going high volume. I'm still going to get hypertrophy from that because I mean, I could barely even finish. I'm like, like freaking out at the end, right? So if that makes sense, it's like you just need to get your muscles to the point that they're having a very very hard time completing the set, right?
Right.
So you don't always need to do some tri-set of that's, but even if I was just doing regular, supinating, the ones where your hands are kind of turning, like they're by, your palms are facing in at the bottom and then they're facing your body at the top, right? Well, I might do 17 and a half pounds on that and I really dial it in and I might get to like 12 and I'm like, ah, that's all I'm looking for, right?
Mhm.
So, if I'm going lower in my reps, my weight is going to go up.
Right.
Or sometimes I might pick up a dumbbell and I'm thinking I can only do 10 pounds for some front raises. Well, and then I sit down to do it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so easy. This is like way too light. I'll slow down my tempo. I'll start
Mhm.
doing it really slow, and we'll get into that one in a second to make it harder. So
Right.
hypertrophy in a nutshell is how can I make this harder for my muscles to do? Okay. So keep that in mind. Close to failure or failure, you're not always going to be in the mood to do that. So if you just kind of, shoot for that most of the time, you'll be set up better for hypertrophy. Okay, let's talk about frequency. So these are all training variables. Okay, I made a post about this like a couple weeks ago and I couldn't believe how well it went over. I didn't realize that so many people are unaware of all of the different variables to change up your training. Like people just think I've been doing 15 pounds. I got to do 17 and a half. That is only one variable. The load
Mhm.
that you're using is only one of many. Okay. So frequency, this means how many workout sessions you're having in a period of time, typically like a week or, a month or whatever. So here's the deal on this. So, a lot of this research comes from Brad Schoenfeld, so shout out to him, but he's done so much on this, on training in general. But he showed, that what was okay, yeah. When you do a higher frequency, meaning you're working out more often, so maybe you're doing like 5 days a week or 6 days a week, that when you don't that doesn't mean you are increasing, like, your volume of training. So what I mean by this is, like, let's say I'm doing 3 really hard days, right? Like they're heavy, like I'm doing like a bunch of exercises. It's like and then I'm taking a rest day versus I'm taking that same amount of exercises and I'm breaking them up into 5 days instead
Mhm.
of 3 days. What they showed was that, that did have a slightly favorable improvement in
Mm.
hypertrophy gains. That being said, you can still totally do the 3 days a week and recover, okay? But just letting and that's how I do it because I like my days I like to have a workout time. It's like, that is
Mhm.
the time that I work out,
Right.
right? And it also is like a mood booster for me. So I personally prefer higher volume, less load. Like today, all I did was 3 back exercises and that biceps thing I just told you and walked.
Yeah.
That's it. So I don't do a lot of volume within the workout. I prefer a higher frequency like that with less total volume in each workout. And they did show that that had a favorable impact. So just throwing that out there, but you can still do the other way too. All these things are good. Okay. All right. Next, I just want to get into some of this in the training. We're also going to talk about sleep and nutrition and recovery and, considerations with your hormones and inflammation and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But these are things that I find that especially women tend to maybe not know if they haven't gone into training as a profession or gotten super nerdy about it, right? So I just wanted to send this people's way. Men too, but sometimes I don't know. It's cultural more for men to be into this stuff, right? So they get into it more. Okay, contraction type. Concentric or eccentric? That's the great
Mhm.
question, right? So concentric is like the hard part of the lift. So in a biceps curl, I'll just keep using that as an example because it's easy. That'd be when you're lifting it, and eccentric is the lowering portion. And we've always pretty much it's been word on the street is if you want gains, if you want to build muscle, you want that eccentric portion to be accentuated. You want to control it on the way down, right?
Mhm.
Um, this is true. This is true. But what I wanted to share that was really interesting from this umbrella review is like going through all these different studies, they basically said the concentric has value and the eccentric value. So the answer is yes. And one note that was really interesting on this was that they showed that the concentric, so the lifting part, tends to create hypertrophy more in the middle of the muscle belly,
Huh.
whereas the eccentric tends to create more hypertrophy in the distal portions, like the ends of it, right? So the
Wow.
answer is yes.
Very
But
interesting. I mean, and
mhm,
that is definitely news.
mhm. And, like, I really want to accentuate this, like, punctuate this for women, because like, and guys too, like, when I see newer lifters in the gym, I see a lot of lack of control over the
Mhm.
movement, right? It's kind of like din 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 din, which is super understandable. Okay, you're learning; it's all good in the hood, and so because it's so common, I just want to say, like, the more you are really like squeeze, engage, control it. So if I'm doing a biceps curl, I'm not just lifting it and lowering and lifting and lowering. I'm like, no, 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 no. I'm squeezing, and I am keeping my elbow and my shoulder in the same place, and I'm squeezing and I'm controlling the way down and I'm squeezing. It's like you're on literally every rep, you're thinking, grow, control, grow, control. You know what I mean? That type of laser focus is really, really big in terms of like people who aren't getting gains and people who are learning how to control it and mind muscle connect it and really engage with that muscle is a big missing piece for a lot of people.
Which you're touching on the mental aspect of it and
Mhm,
the intention behind it, which is huge.
mhm.
I notice if I'm tired, I'm not really feeling like working out, but I have a mirror in front of me and I start lifting and I start focusing and I start talking to my muscles grow
Yep,
and I
yep.
start looking at them in the mirror.
Mhm,
It's like all of a sudden I have that energy,
mhm,
which then is going to create more output
mhm.
because I'm creating energy and I'm actually going to be able to do more output than I was when I first walked in exhausted,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And, we can talk about the exhaustion. That's a whole nother piece. But the intention behind it, and I know we're going to get into that as well, but
Mhm.
that is part of that the slow movements and the actual focus on it.
Yeah, like today I was seated at the, lat pull down thing, and I put a little handle on it. I was doing some single arm ones, and I have my, opposite hand on my lat that's
Mhm.
working, and I've got my eyes closed, I'm pulling down, I'm feeling it
Yeah.
contract, and then I'm feeling it release, 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 and stretch, but I don't wanna lose the tension all the way and right back into it, right? And so I'm, like, closing my eyes and literally palpating it to, like, really connect with what's happening versus just going over to it and pulling it down a little bit.
Yeah.
And if you need a trainer or you need, at least to get on some anatomy, like look it up. Where are lats? Like, how do they work? Get nerdy like that so you know what you're actually doing versus just like, oh, people pull this thing down, Like
Yeah.
dive in, get nerdy. All right. Um, okay, next. Time under tension. I got to talk about this one. Okay. So this, they call this repetition duration. So we just talked about that a bit, right?
Mhm.
Well, this is interesting. So basically what they found in this review was that anywhere from half a second to 8 seconds of time under tension. So what that means is like, I mean, I don't know how they did half a second.
Mhm.
But, anywhere up to 8 seconds of like, so if that's a bicep curl, I might go 1, 2, 3 on the way down, straight, nothing at the bottom, and then 1, 2, 2 seconds on the way up, right? So that's like 5 seconds of time under tension. Down 2, 3, up 2, down 2, 3, up 2. Or you could do a totally different. You could do like down for 2, up for 1, down for 2, up for. You can do any kind of tempo you want. But what they found was that anywhere in that range resulted in hypertrophy.
Okay.
And they also found that anything 10 seconds or more actually had a negative impact on
Mhm.
hypertrophy. So you don't want to be going crazy slow. And it kind of makes sense to me because you lose some of that intensity of
Mhm.
recruitment of the muscle fibers and you're going to go so light. I think you'd be better to go a little heavier and just a little bit. I mean, I don't think that the data shows that would be better, but those are where my mind, that's where my mind went in terms of possibly why. Okay. Exercise order, doesn't really matter unless, like, you've got a coach and they're trying to help you, like, fatigues this certain muscles that this other one has to take over. So unless, like, you know what you're doing or you have a coach who knows what you're in there, like, strategically, like, "No, no, no, you need to do them in this order." Otherwise, like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if people ask about that a lot, they didn't see any huge differences on that. Time of day didn't matter. Nope, didn't matter on hypertrophy.
Interesting.
And then periodization. This is like basically how you design your training program. They just basically showed that the only thing that was significant there was like often people do what's called linear periodization, which means like, okay, you're going to do 3 sets of 8 at a like little bit lighter weight. And then the next time you're going to do 3 sets of 7 a little heavier. And then you do 3 sets of 6 a little heavier. And then 3 sets of 5 a little heavier. That's really typical. They actually found that the inverse or reverse. So what that would mean is like you're actually increasing your reps and going lighter resulted in more hypertrophy. Like
Mm,
just a little, right? So that was interesting for me. Okay.
mhm.
And then last one on this is blood flow restriction does help with muscle hypertrophy. So I won't get into that for the sake of time, but you can look
Right.
into that if you'd like. And I've done it and it's really cool. And okay.
What about variety? What about
Um
changing changing
yeah.
your exercises for each muscle group or doing the same ones over and over and over again?
I mean, changing up your exercise selection is always going to give you a little bit different stimulus. So it is important. That one on this umbrella review came into it's like undulating periodization, which means like you might do strength on Monday and then like a metabolic endurance, like higher rep thing on Wednesday, and then you might do hypertrophy on Friday, or you might do a hit circuit and like, switch it all up. They didn't find there wasn't a significant difference in terms of hypertrophy for well, I mean, that was a bad example I just gave, but there wasn't a significant difference. I will say, yes, if you're doing the same exercises constantly, it's going to become increasingly difficult to induce hypertrophy because your muscles are just so used to that. So switch up your exercise selection with exercises that are proven to work. Okay. We don't need to be doing like BOSU single leg squats while we bicep curl. Like, no, no, no. And I actually, on that note, women, I'm just gonna be straight up. If you are super obsessed with all these, like, I'm doing 3 different exercises or 2 different exercises at a time, a lot of women think these are called compound lifts. Those are not compound lifts. Compound lifts are multi joint. A compound lift is a squat or a deadlift and those are awesome. These things where it's like I'm squatting and I'm doing bicep curls at the same time, don't. You will get so much further if you will this actually this is going to segue us perfectly into the next session. Women are so obsessed with burning calories and like getting their heart thumping and being chronically busy and super efficient. And I get it because in a
Mhm.
lot of ways we have to. We got kids and careers and all of that. But if you will take a leap of faith and stop doing that in the gym. That is the mindset that had me overweight. Like in all of my before pictures, I'm
Mm,
running marathons, I'm doing workout classes, like everything's got to be like super efficient. I'm maximizing my time.
yeah.
When I stopped doing that and I just actually like learned how to squat and started getting heavier and took rest intervals. Yep. And I'm not burning calories right now cuz I'm resting and then gradually got better at that. That is when my body transformed. Obviously, nutrition played a part also, but I went from I will always be fat and nothing will ever work for me to I don't even think I could get fat anymore if I tried. And I say that as a message of hope because that is what like stopping doing all of this like crazy I'm doing a bunch of things at once. So I get my heart rate up and I burn off that cake from yesterday. When I stopped doing that and I started getting serious about resistance training, like a athlete, like you are like gonna feel like a bodybuilder, like you get into it. That is when everything became my results went exponential. Okay, so
So
that's
what's the why behind that? Because
because you
people
can't
are
lift as
listening.
much. You can't lift as much. You cannot stress the muscles as much. When you're sitting there trying to squat and do bicep curls and you do a squat and then a bicep curl, a squat and a bicep curl, that's essentially cardio. You know,
Yeah.
you might get a little bit, especially if you're new, if you're brand new and you just started and, like they call it newbie gains. Yeah, it's a new stressor, but you will hit a a point where that is not going to do anything for you anymore. Whereas if I really like just stop, I'm just doing biceps right now and I am like taxing the crap out of my biceps and I have to rest or I won't be able to push to that level in my next set. That's when you're going to actually stress the muscles enough that you're going to get all these metabolic adaptations that you hear all over social media about insulin sensitivity and growth hormone and longevity and all of these things. You have to stress the muscles enough to be able to get those things and kind of half acing it through doing trying to do all these things, the circus act at once. You're not going to be able to push yourself to those levels doing those kinds of things. So that is my biggest like homie hookup for women is like you can do supersets.
Mhm.
That will make a lot of women, you could do like a bent over row to a I don't know, like barbell row. I mean, if you want a superset, or you can do
Yeah.
different biceps and then I'm going to do a back. Fine, if that gets you past your trying to do everything at once, that's fine. I like supersets are great, but it's just when you're trying to do multiple resistance training exercises at once, you are minimizing your results because you just can't push yourself to those levels. Okay.